welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We ask, in what ways can we show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can we mine the wisdom from the experiences of our lives and expand into those challenges? If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs, so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. And if you feel like giving a little back to this free content, please become a patron of the show and receive extra member benefits for less than a coffee a month. Or you can leave a review on iTunes and Facebook, all of which helps the podcast keep going and reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul. Head on over to patreon.com/NTM podcast to find out more. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today we have the continuation of the delicious conversation with the even more delicious Rhea Dempsey, which we really hope that you gain enormous wisdom and a little bit of lighthearted chuckling along the way. I think that's the best woman in the world that can do that. She's so fabulous. I just love it so much. I love when you get to the point where she's so sure and gives so few fucks about the system.
It's just so true.
It's so good. I'm like, I think I got out of that interview and I was actually went, oh my God, one day I'm going to be like 70 and like
he is grandma goals. Like hashtag grandma goals.
So true. So true. So before we jump into that, I'd love to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au, scroll on down to the red banner, fill in your email address, and once every so often we will send you out an email with links to everything that is going on in our world, catch-ups on where we're at, and links in case there's something that you've missed or you'd love to be part of. So please jump on nourishingthemother.com.au.
And enjoy the rest of our conversation with Rhea. Here we go.
I just wondered, from your book, you had a beautiful section in there on control versus surrender. And I wondered if you'd just talk around that, because as I'm sure, you know, you and Bridget would both agree, that's still a conversation that is paramount and pivotal of the modern woman.
Yes. Yes. I say another thing to people, that just, you know, this is quite a big book, and I've written it over quite some years, and I keep saying to myself, I'm going to have to study that book when I start to talk about it, because you know, what have I said in there? I'm calling my age into question, but I'm pretty sure that I talk about that in chapter 2. In chapter 1, where I remember the subheading is the fucking epidural, and it's got all of the research, not only about epidurals, but you know, about the medical culture and how a lot of it's debunked. And in chapter 2, I'm talking about, we call it opening Pandora's box. So really, this is trying to go in to the individual woman, and remembering so many years of doing weekly classes with pregnant women and postnatal women, so delicious, and sharing, like sitting in circle, all that. Well, who are you, and how do you meet this culture? How do you meet this experience? And in that, I have that section called Everyday Vulnerabilities. Everyday vulnerabilities, that I'm not talking about the woman, everyday vulnerabilities, and how those everyday vulnerabilities can meet that birth culture. And one of them, I think, then is the power, the surrender, and the control or surrender. And so again, there's research about this, but also in my own experience of watching this shift. Remember when I had my babies in the 70s, most women were, they're at home as mothers and were not, I don't know when we ever thought we would go back to work. Maybe we never thought we would go back to work. Like if you were in England as a married woman, being pregnant with my first baby, I couldn't work anymore. So life has changed. And I've been, older women like me, we've watched some of those changes. In some ways, we've tried to make some of those changes. But that aspect of now young women coming to have their babies, much more because their work life and their expectation that they will combine mothering and their profession or their work life, to be that woman in the workplace and be pregnant and a new mum requires a lot of control of the feminine aspects of ourselves, the rhythm, whether we're menstruating and we're at work and how does that work, or when we're late pregnancy and all those hormones are starting to do their beautiful work of starting to swamp that brain and get the mother attuned to the baby, but that doesn't quite mean that she's quite on the ball as she might otherwise be, or perhaps she's more on the ball with some areas of work than she ever was because she's in much more of a creative space. But that thing to be in control, which is a sort of a thinking brain thing, to be in control of the body. To in late pregnancy, we know for oxytocin, it's more complex than that, but oxytocin, really queen oxytocin, I call her. So little of her available in birth now. She's been done over. Queen oxytocin has been, what do you call it when you get rid of a queen or a king? Yeah. To have queen oxytocin running that knows what it's doing to shape the birth and the baby and the bonding, women need to be able to attune to the rhythm of their bodies in late pregnancy. But to fit with their worldly, their work and their worldly obligations, when they've got to control their body so that they can't surrender to the rhythm of when they feel like it's time to get up, or they need a bit more rest, or they need to eat now, or they need to go to the toilet now, or they're trying to control exactly. And so that aspect of many women having lived that quite strongly before they're pregnant, and now still even more so when they're pregnant, and then we wonder why they want to stay in control when they're in labour. You can't really just switch that separate to what that all means about oxytocin and how that's working in the body, but that thing about is being in control, and being in control of the body in particular is something that I think in modern contemporary women are very used to. So one of the aspects that all the interventions can offer women is, first of all, the comfort. I talk about the 3 C's: comfort, convenience, and control. The epidural offers comfort. You can be comfortable through that whole caper. It's a pity about how the labour goes, but you can be comfortable. Convenience, of course, that aspect of control, I'm sort of putting these together, that aspect about feeling like you could or should or you must control how all this works. Well, much easier and more convenient for everybody to know that the baby's going to be induced on Monday, or it's going to be the Caesar is done on Tuesday, or what have you, rather than the unpredictable nature of how long a labour might take, or how, when a baby might decide it's time to come. So that sort of fits within that control mechanism as well. So sometimes, we used to in the earlier days know that certain obstetricians, would have a golf game on Fridays. So surprise, surprise, they wanted all their women who were likely to be due on the weekend to be induced on Wednesday or Thursday. Surely not, you say, but yes, we know. Or hospitals. Hospitals are, it's much easier for a hospital administration to know that they've got 2/3 or more of their women being induced, rather than the spontaneity of waiting on these troublesome babies who knows, they might all want to come together at the full moon, and that would be a terrible problem in the hospital where we haven't got enough staff on, or it's too busy or something. Much easier for them to spread. So you can think I'm joking about, well, not joking about it, I'm making too light of it, but if women were told, some women can ask, some women will say, yes, I want the baby I'm happy to have the baby induced at this point or this point. And they could choose that, and that will actually pretty easy for women to have that happen. What's more difficult for women is to say, well, I just want to wait and let the baby do its thing. That's a harder thing in this birth culture. But what can happen in the birth culture is that the reasons why an induction might be best, not for the mother and the baby, but for the hospital system, it's not that, well, if they say, look, the baby's fine, you're fine, but really we've got a big load of births this month and lots of the babies are just lagging behind, and we know that we're really going to come under the pump soon because the full moon's coming and we're just going to be crazy. Do you mind if we induce your baby this week so that we just got a little bit of a less load? If they would say that, some women would probably say yes. Or at least women would know that's not about me and my body. That's not about birth being dangerous or my body not working or my baby not working. That's a reasonable idea about work throughput. But no, they don't say that. They don't say that to women. They say to women, look, we're getting a bit worried about your baby. It seems the flavour of the month at the moment is, or the flavour of the last few months, we're a bit worried about your baby. It's getting quite big. Quite worried about the size of this baby, and really feel that probably thinking about it, this has started like 3 weeks out or more, just a little drop. Worried about your baby. Might be best if we think about inducing, we just watch it. That's how it starts. And then a little bit further down the track, yes, we're very worried about the size of your baby and I think it's best to induce this week. Yeah.
It's so funny because I've heard that at least 3 times this year. Yeah.
And then the babies are induced and more. And they're below average size, or they're totally on average size. Yeah. So these are bigger structural issues, not only occasionally, this is so tricky to tease out, when is what they're saying to me absolutely based around medical need for me and my baby that I need to be taking on board, and how much of it is out of these other. So the key to answering that question for women is to hopefully be able to access continuity of care, continuity of midwifery care in particular, but only 8% of women can. So that's the big push that's one of the big pushes that we really need. So we're going here, there and everywhere. I'm hoping I'm still bringing
because we could listen to you forever, but I'm like, I'm not going to get through my 12 questions here. So I'm selecting, going, okay, Julie, which are the most important ones to ask? One of them was in your book. So in your first book, you spoke a lot about wild cards for women going into birth. I know that you've mentioned them a couple of times here, so I'd love for you to give just a mild summary of what that looks like. But my question from your current book was more around, you started to talk about the postnatal effects of wild cards, and I haven't seen someone else talk about that before. So I was interested in that, but certainly in what a wild card even means.
So I use that term. Well, I think that it's a common term. People understand a little bit about card playing and wild cards, that they're something that have high dynamic. You don't exactly know where they're going to come out in a game, but they have some high potency in the situation. So if I think about birth, then I think about the sort of life issues that can act as wild cards. We don't exactly know. We know they have potency. We don't know exactly how they might play or when they might play, but we're pretty sure that they will have some sort of impact. So that's my overall thing about wild cards. So in the second book, with wild cards, I'm looking more. In the first book, I'm framing it in particular around functional physiological pain, just the hard gig, of a birth, yeah. I talk a little bit about emotional and psychological stuff, but the second book I go much more deeply into the psychological and emotional stuff, and in particular around the idea of wild cards. So these are, I can't just think, how can I do this short and sharp?
You don't have to do it short. Please don't feel constrained.
So the big thing that comes in this book, which I've been this is where chapter 3 in this second book is where I started writing both these books. I thought it was going to be one big book. I realised eventually that I would never finish it if that was the case. And then I realised, well, to start talking much more about these deeper psychological things, it was useless to talk about these if women weren't on the case about the pain and the choices they're making about that. So that's the first book. So the second book, where I started in all of this was chapter 3, understanding about attachment styles. So this takes, and witnessing this, the fallout or the implications of this in births over many, many years. And certainly in terms of counselling, my counselling work and what have you, this is an underpinning of so much of my understanding, many people's understanding. And so I wanted to, in that chapter, I wanted to do 2 things, probably 100 things, but at least 2 things. And one was to talk up the understanding about attachment. Mm. Not that I'm framing it from the baby's point of view, but I thought that if I do a good job of explaining about attachment from the point of view of us as adults, that will be like framing a deeper understanding about how we then need to be with our babies and our small children and so on. So I wanted to talk about attachment. So I particularly wanted to talk about attachment in terms of how it plays out in birth. So I've got some good feedback about how I've written it, and people find that they can understand it, so that's good. But if we understand then about attachment, so this is about how secure, so this is about our emotional and psychological security, particularly in threat situations. Mm. In threat situations. And secure attachment is, of course, that in threat situations, this is what we would hope our babies, our small children, our children across their lives feel, that when we're in a threat situation, and threat situations can be all sorts of things that where we know that we need soothing, we know that we need to feel safe, that we can turn to others who we know and trust will provide that sort of safety. And, the other side of that is, of course, that also because we know that and we've had that model, we know how to offer that to somebody else if that's the caregiving side of the attachment process. But, of course, we know that that takes sustained, attuned parenting across at least that first 3 years of life to lay down that as an embedded sense of feeling I'm okay. Sometimes I'm in threat. Sometimes I'm nervous, or I'm this, I'm that, and I can turn to other people without any feeling of shame and accept the support and nurture that I need to soothe myself at this point before I then go off to other adventures or whatever. So if we don't get that, building that secure sense of attachment, then the insecure sense of attachment, which is where the three types: the anxious attachment style, which is where the caregiver is sometimes when you're in need or in threat, sometimes they're available and sometimes they're not. You can't quite predict when, so it leads to this anxiousness about, well, will they be there for me? Is it safe? Is it not safe? Is it all that anxiousness, which of course sets a whole set point of stress hormones in the body of the baby, the small child, adult, so on. And also with anxious attachment, of course, it leads to a hyperactivating of distress signals, because just sometimes it'll work. You don't know. You can't predict. Sometimes your caregivers are on, sometimes they're not. You can't quite predict, but, if you keep trying, It's like the kid at the supermarket checkout. It's worth their while to keep throwing that tantrum, and because just one day you might give them the chubba-chomp. Mm. So the anxious attachment, they're hypervigilant, they're anxious and staying anxious, wondering when will I feel safe, won't I feel safe, and they often, when they're in distress, hyperactivate their distress. If you're thinking about birth, you can think about how women who are anxiously attached might be playing in their birth situation. An exaggeration of, and epidurals do a beautiful job of calming all that down, but there can be an exaggeration of the distress that they're feeling in order to try and elicit the attention of women and support. Of course, in birth, particularly for birth where we want women, for women who want to have a go at normal physiological childbirth, it's not the sort of support that will soothe them and say it's all right, we'll take it all away, i.e. the epidural. It's the sort of support that says, yeah, I can see it's pretty tough, but, I'm with you and I'll stay with you and let's work this through or what have you. But anyway, the anxious style of attachment is one, plays out quite strongly in the birth scene. Then we have the avoidance style of attachment, which is where it's consistent. The caregivers are consistently unavailable. So that small child, that baby, that small child, really tune in, turn into themselves. They draw into themselves the feeling that, I've just got to rely on myself and I can't be vulnerable, can't show any vulnerability. Vulnerability is not going to be met. It's not safe for me to be vulnerable, and in fact it's very shameful if I am vulnerable because I am okay on my own and I can do it all on my own, because that's the message that they're getting. So, I'm just doing very quick jumps here, but you can probably see that for that woman the epidural is brilliant. Don't need anybody, epidural, not feeling anything. Certainly no shame about being in distress or crying or calling out or whatever. Perfect match. Pity about the birth, pity about the baby, and what will it mean after the birth anyway. There's the disorganised attachment, which is really around where the caregiver is both, well, it can be all of those things, but is also the cause of the fear and the distress. So this is in very dysfunctional situations where the caregiver is causing the fear, but also they are the source, hopefully the source of the soothing. So this is disorganised attachment all over the place, come out of very traumatic childhoods. So, so talking about that. So in birth is a threat situation. Yeah. So remember, attachment styles get activated. Our attachment style, however it's formed across our life, and some of us do a lot of work and pay a lot of money to therapists for many years across our lives to what we call earn a secure attachment. It hasn't been given to us through our early life, but we've done a lot of work to earn it. Just under half of people, the stats say, have a secure attachment style. So,
that's actually more than I thought.
Right. So it's not a given. So then but then as an adult, and that unless you've been blessed with a secure attachment style because of your parents being on the case and you so on, or you've done that work for yourself, here you are in birth, this adult woman. It's a stress situation, and particularly it's a stress situation in our birth culture as it is at present because of all of the interventions and the fear of that it doesn't work, the mindset that I've talked about already, as well as just dealing with so many strangers and no strong, secure relationship. Well, the only person being your partner, but of course they can be freaking out, so that's not a solid, secure relationship. Or sense of safety. So the mother's attachment style is triggered, and so then that can bring up, unless you have a secure style of attachment, really it brings up shame. Not just the common garden social shame of being concerned about who's seeing your body or walking in the middle with you got your legs akimbo, or they're coming in when this is happening or that happened. That sort of social shame of feeling like I want some privacy or whatever. But this deep level, what in Gestalt therapy, which I've done more of, they use this beautiful language called ground shame. This is like the bedrock of the nature, the character, the formation of the child is shame. And this comes out of attachment. This comes out of, does the child feel like they're loved and they're cared for and that somebody will be there for them to, as I've explained with secure attachment, so that they feel that they are okay. Whatever they're going through, they're okay, and that people will love and respond to me and care for me and so on and offer me the support I need in this tricky point. The child that doesn't have a secure attachment, then they take on board that thing that I am not okay. That's fundamental, core, ground level. This is this ground shame. So that's hard work, protecting ourselves from ground shame.
And how does that play out postnatally?
Yeah, so across the birth, in present birth culture, strangers, some who offer something warm, some who don't, so on, so on, so on. The attachment style is triggered because of the threat situation of the birth. If it is not met, then the stress system in the body, so on, the births don't go well usually anyway. But the mother is activated, and this activates not only this. So keep that in mind. But not only this, but when we're thinking about our future when we have our babies. We're thinking about all the things that are, how we're going to be and how it's. Many of us don't understand how we are also being drawn back into our past, because we're being drawn back into the past of babies, mothering, family life, that early time, how we were held, those early 3 years, when our memory systems are laid down in our muscles and our not like memory, not like explicit memory where we remember on that day we did that and then we did that and we did not that memory, but the implicit memory system, which is laid down deeply in our body. And so the birth activates the implicit memory system of how we were born, because those memory systems are, it's living in our bodies about how we were born. So we've got that. We've also got, if our early childhood, those early 3 years, were not offering us this secure sense of attachment, and then therefore not carrying any ground shame, but that I'm okay. If we don't have that, and we have the thing that I'm not okay, and we're tapping into those deep implicit memories, that we hold our own baby, or as in we're in that space with our own baby. So all of this can come up in the postnatal arena. Sometimes as more general running depression and, sometimes deeper sort of psychologies, but often also with specific memories that can be there that feel that they're part of this distress that from the past, which is being in a way reawakened because of the birth experience anyway, and because of holding our new baby in our arms. But if that's also happening in a care setting where you're not being respected, where you're not getting any nurture and care in that situation, or you're just a number that's being pushed through a system, or your partner isn't stable for you because they're freaking out or what have you, then that's all of that is exacerbated as well once that's into that postnatal arena. I'm sure it's much complex that I've explained here, but hopefully it's...
I'm sure it is. I mean, and I would love everyone to buy your book to actually deeply and thoroughly, obviously, enter these conversations. But I just really wanted to, I guess, for me, highlight some of the places that I read in this book and went, oh, so important. Oh, that's so important. It was more just to scoot over these as a overview as opposed to a thorough, dive.
Maybe one other aspect that's so important, which is, so chapter 7, we had so much stuff about the couple relationship and I had so much to say. It's like the chapters were, how did we structure? And we thought we just got to make a chapter just for the partners.
I'm so good. This is one of my questions, Rhea.
Okay.
Birth is a rite of passage for partners. Is this where you're going?
Yeah, well, I could go. I'm not going there, but I could, yes. That's because before, I mean, all these dynamics between couples have been going on forever, ever. Just that now, since, and again, here's another thing that I sometimes feel like I need to apologise for as part of the generation of women to draw our partners into the birth space, yeah? And some beautiful, beautiful things have happened because of that, because we see the birth of the nurturing father who's coming out of that, and we would never want to step back from that, and so beautiful to see. But what we also see, since fathers have been in the birth space, that the intervention rates have been going through the fucking roof. So what is that all about? And so if you understand attachment, some of the stuff I'm saying about attachment, this is part of that story, because the partners, attachment is not only about making that secure, the feeling of security, the safe haven, the language for attachment, that safe haven, but attachment also requires, because for the life of a child, they need to be heading out into the world to gain mastery and adventure and everything. So a solid attachment figure needs to offer soothing when needed, but also encourage into activity and adventure. That could look like the blocks over there in the corner, or it could look like going and exploring in the garden, but coming back and making sure you're watching your mum and all of those. We see it in the little kids. So in the birth, so that the attachment figure and the partner is often the attachment figure in the birth space now, because everybody else is a stranger. And that attachment figure who's the partner, in order for the mother to both be soothed but also to be encouraged on into the work of exploring the blocks, or the work of exploring the garden, or the work of exploring that new work job that you've got when you're a teenager, or the work here is the work of birthing. Because anybody can offer in birth, because of the drugs, can offer that soothing safety. Look, we'll keep you safe here. It just sort of fucks the labour. To have somebody who can offer that soothing, but also that encouragement into the effort, this is the area that's so difficult. And many partners, as I said, they're happier if the woman's on an epidural, because a whole lot of factors come in together, but they can't see this as powerful, potent work to encourage her into.
No, it becomes destabilizing for their attachment styles also.
So there's a whole dance going on there. So, of course, to get back to that thing, that rite of passage for partners, so if we're bringing partners into the birth space, I mean, if the partner is another woman, so she may have given birth herself already, and then still can be complexity in the thing, but maybe she's got some grounded knowledge about birth that she can offer to the woman who's giving birth. Because mainly the partners are the fathers of the babies, and they don't have grounded knowledge about birth. They might, if it's a second, third baby or what have you, have some grounded witnessing of being birthed, but something about having women who know where do doulas come from, where do midwives come from, this shared understanding of the process in the female environment. So partners who are the key foundation for a woman in that sea of strangers with all these weird things happening are in a very tricky space. You know that, of course, when the birth is supported by somebody else who's, whether it's the known midwife or the doula or whatever, then the partners get supported as well. And then what we see is the best of the couple relationship come into that birth space. We see all the love and the juiciness of the hormones and everything so fantastic, because the partners aren't freaking out. And if they do freak out and they look over and they see the midwife sitting in the corner having a cup of tea with a big smile on their face and nodding, I think, oh, right, it looks pretty freaky to me, but it must be okay. So there's that
security there.
Yes. But so for partners to be in that witness space in a birth and to be able to be present to the woman as she's doing that hard work, and not to be triggered into their own, because they're in a birth space. Whenever have they been in a birth space before? Well, they were born, so it can trigger some of their own implicit memories. Also in the early time with how they were held, so all of their own early life stuff, the first 3 years can start to come up, can start to be there in the birth space as well as in the early time at home.
It's so complex, isn't it? Like as soon as you start digging, it's like the rabbit hole keeps going. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I know we've had you a really long time, Rhea, but I'm really, really, really desperate to know just some mum wisdom from you before we wrap up. And what I really, really want to know, because when I remember sitting in circle with you, what is now, 11, 12 years ago, was I remember you talking about your daughters, and we were talking about what does it mean for, you know, what type of births will your children have? And I remember you saying one of your children, when she was angry at you as a teenager, she used to yell back at you, yeah, well, I'm having a Caesar when I grow up, and slamming the door. And I remember joking about it with you, and then you were like, so I don't know, you know. And here you are, having been the grandmother at the birth and home birth of every single one of your grandchildren for all 3 of your daughters. Like, how does that happen? And that seems complex. Like in my head, I'm like, that seems complex. For me, who doesn't have a secure mother attachment, the whole thing of having my mum in the birth space is complex to begin with. And then I'm like, even as a mother with my own children, could I hold that space? Would there be triggering there? Would they even choose it? Or would they be, I'm having the fucking Caesar, just to, like, I'm like, how does this work, Rhea?
What a privilege, hey? What a privilege. I remember with my first daughter, who had the first grandchild, and she was born in hospital, of course, but she was just totally attuned to home birth because, of course, you've got to remember too, in the early days of the home birth, the kids would come along, you know.
Yeah.
So they were exposed. They'd all been to births, well, their younger siblings' births, but also other births. And we had some home births, women who lived in the country and came and had their babies at our place, and so they'd just been, you know, immersed. So so there's that. So they had a trust of birth. But I did have the conversation with her. I said, you know, you don't, not so much you don't have to have met the birth, because in fact she was having a baby at my place anyway. They wanted to have the baby here. So I said, well, okay, so what role do you know, will I be the mum who's making the cups of tea, and, you know, do you want that, or do you want me, what do you think? And she said, she looked me in the eye, she said, Mum, I hear you know a thing or two about birth, and I want every bit of what you know to be there with me in that birth space. I said, oh, okay, very clear. So that was that, and then they, you know, as siblings, they'd been at the births, so they all then saw the template of how that worked. So they were all happy to have me there, and so I, in the main, worked with midwives I'd done lots of births with, who were there with the grandchildren. So we just had, it was a team.
Hang on, wind it back. What was that first experience like? Like, how was that for you as a mother, witnessing now your daughter going through birth? Were there moments where she wasn't coping and you felt in conflict about that, or not?
No. No, they were all magnificent.
What do you put that down to?
Well, I mean, I guess that they don't. So there's the difference between being fearful of birth and being respectful of birth, yeah? So they were respectful of birth, but they weren't fearful of birth. So, and also that whole thing, they knew the midwives because they're part of our friendship group anyway. So, like, and they're at home. They're surrounded just by people who know and love them. So the whole oxytocin is just, I mean, it's another factor, I guess, that people don't understand. But those rooms where you've got everybody who's in love with one another, those rooms are pumping with oxytocin. So the baby and the mum are catching all of that as well as we're catching it off them. So I think that they just have a trust in birth and a trust in the people who are around them, and were able then to surrender to it.
So it wasn't a different experience for you witnessing birth of your daughter?
I mean, it was delicious and delightful to meet those grandchildren, but there wasn't, so this just takes me a little bit, as usual, back a little bit before I come forward. But, I'm not medically trained. I mean, I wouldn't know how to take a pulse or do anything. I've never entered that arena about birth. I have existed in the world of birth in terms of the emotional and psychological, and then our understanding about hormones and how to facilitate them, and the phys ed teachers. They're all the parts of me that come together in the birth. And so over the years of working with midwives who are holding the as well as that beautiful nurturing and caring, but also the medical expertise, and in particular working with, some of them lots. So we all know what our boundaries are and respect what we each bring into this situation. So if, in terms of any birth that I'm at, then, I need to know from the point of view of the midwives, is everything medically going fine? Can I, there seems to be something a bit stuck here or what have you. Is this playing out in the mother's body or the baby's body? Or is there space here for me to come in and do a bit more psychological, emotional work? So we've all had that sort of boundary with one another. And so I had that also with my daughters, that knowing and trusting the midwives were watching over the things that, and so I think at one point she called for me, I remember, and so we just had a lovely cuddle and a bit of a dance, and then she was back, back into her own potency and what have you. So from my point of view, and I'm always checking with with people a lot and do a lot of birth, we just have to look at one another, a little bit of a slight nod of we don't have to have any long conversations about it, or so it was just a very harmonious dance all the way through. Not really. I mean, at the end, she had two big babies. She had the first baby, a 10-pound baby or something, and the second one nearly 11 pounds. So, powerful woman. So she did need a little bit more stern motherly encouragement to have to keep working hard to get that baby out. And then when we saw the baby, we were all like, oh my God, how brilliant she was, and that was needed. But no, it was, I mean, I guess it was beautiful for me really to be with my grandchildren and also to be with my daughters and to offer that sense of that capacity. But it was also beautiful for me to be with midwives I've loving friends and midwives who I've done so many births with, so that we're all like, nowhere in there was there any edges that would have adrenaline be part of that picture. So, and that was the same for each of the grandbabies. The stroppy teenager.
Yeah, I was interested.
She's the one who's just had the latest grandchild, and it was the most straightforward they were all straightforward, but it was the shortest of the labours for the first baby. So
it's extraordinary.
Yeah. So no Caesar, no defiant teenager. No, the defiant teenager didn't even emerge. She wasn't there. She was very, very much that deeply embodied body. Yeah.
So I just have to ask you, before we move into our 3 questions, do you have any deep motherly wisdom that you feel you would like to just disperse on Bridget and I and any of the beautiful conscious mothers that are here, feeling like we are a little bit of a niche group and we're investing huge amounts of love and time and energy and thought into the raising of these little children and babies, with the women the prayer that we're going to make a difference? Yeah. So is there motherly advice that you would just like, that we will just receive graciously?
So I don't know how that is, but certainly I know that putting in those early years, I mean, I guess this is then about attachment and various other things, but really that foundation of loving care, then that makes a bond that can withstand. So I think the early years before school and the early 1 or 2 years of school, then we'll see you through like a breeze through the latter part of primary school. where the kids are out there in the world a bit more and you're involved. And with that strong bond, it will see you through some of the stormy times in the teenage years. And it's important, those stormy times are important. You know, they need to be, their job is to come into themselves. And so sometimes they have to do a bit of destroying of their parents. That's too strong a word, but I mean in psychological terms, they've got to stake their claim in their own life. And so the thing about that is that as parents, yes, to be strong and solid with them, but you're encouraging them into their life. Because if you haven't encouraged them into their life, then they'll stake a claim on it big time in their teenage years. So that starts to, whereas if you've offered that up bit by bit through the earlier years, then they still have to do some more work on that to claim themselves, but it's not usually quite so dramatic. But just keeping a steady, I guess you've got to know them, you know, as individuals. It's, if you've got a few kids, it's a bit hard. Of course, they fall into that thing about first, second, third, or fourth, and how much energy you've got. But really knowing those things about each of them, so that you're at times, if one or other of them has something going on, that you really are attuned to who that kid is, rather than, I don't know, seeing them as part of a group, but just something about their individuality. I don't know what I can say.
Loved that. I loved hearing that reminder of it's their job to destroy the system so they can find who they are. It's so true. But I love that reminder.
Yeah. So solid doors, that's what you need through the teenage years. And don't take it personally. It's part of their job. Your job is to, give them boundaries and what have you. But if you've done that solid work before,
you know them really well.
Their attachment well, and they got that solid attachment and feel strong about themselves, good about themselves. Then, yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything that you would love to share with us before we ask you our 3 quick-fire questions?
I think I've shared quite a lot.
You have. You've been exceptionally generous with your time. And knowledge. We are very, very grateful. Do you want to ask the questions, Bridgie, or I've got them here if
you've got them in front of you, go with them, Jules. That'd be great.
All right. So the first one, Rhea, that we always ask is, can you share with us a time in your life where you've experienced a challenge or a wound of some sort that you've processed and moved through and turned that wound into wisdom?
Well, without repeating the story, but of course the birth of my first baby.
I love that. Okay. The next question is about the most influential books of your lifetime. And the way that we frame this is, if you could give a reading list to every baby, or particularly every female baby born in Australia, what would be on that reading list?
Yeah, so Germaine, of course. Yeah. The female eunuch is a powerful book for so many of us back there, and the resonance of that. And in fact, the later one, where she looked much more about birth, in fact, was also a very powerful one. Another, yeah, I should have given that some thought. I did read over it when you sent me the questions, and
that's okay. Just think about it for yourself. Yeah. What are the books you're like die hard love?
Yeah. So another one that actually was, because it was of the spirit of the age when I read it, and I read it at that time, was the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So you may not have even heard of this book now.
No, I haven't.
But it was about...
you have, Bridge?
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of about taking a journey. And so I read that actually during the time when I was travelling in Europe, as we did. But I did it quite thoroughly for about 3 years. So that was of its time and of my personal individual time. That was I guess that's what I'm saying. Both of those books came at a time for me in my own life when I was reading them at the time that they were written, and prescient in terms of how life was changing, how society and culture was changing. And so that's a pretty powerful thing, to read a book of its time at its time, rather than to read it and reflect on it later on or something or other. Even though those books, I think, still have got some wisdom to share whenever you might read something like that. So, and of course, Ian May's, just in terms of that, at its time. So Spiritual Midwifery.
Still a fabulous book. It was one of your favourites, wasn't it, Bridgie?
That's like my.
It was like your Bible in your third birth. Yeah.
So I borrowed it from a friend, actually, when I was having my second baby, so the first home birth. And my daughter then was close on too, and she loved that book because she loved the pictures, of the babies coming and what have you. And I remember one afternoon having a bit of an late in the pregnancy with the second baby, having a bit of an afternoon nap, and my daughter was sort of just pottering around. And when I woke, so skilled she was, she cut out most of the pictures out of this friend's book and sticking them in, making her own little book. So anyway, my friend said,
such a beautiful story.
Such a beautiful story. She was happy to just receive both books back. Separate to the main book, but so that's a beautiful story. So that book, another strong one of its time at that point.
Thank you. And our last question is, if you could have a billboard on any major highway in any part of the world that everyone would see, what would it say?
Okay, so this billboard, I did think about this and I thought that would be a brilliant idea. It would have a huge image of the Trojan horse. And the words underneath it would say, "The fucking epic."
Bridgie and I'd have selfies with that one.
They're really robbing women of their potency and power. Anyway, let's leave it there.
It's so fabulous, Rhea. Could you please do a wrap up? We will have all of your links in the show notes under this podcast episode so everyone can find them there. But are you able to just tell our listeners where we can buy both of your books and where we can connect with you and find your work in the world?
Yeah. So the books, they're in a few different places that you could buy, but just to say, really, through my website, you can certainly get them from there. The midwifery group practices here in Melbourne stock them as well. Fertile Ground stocks them. A few other naturopaths and small bookstores stock them. And in fact, certainly the first book is in a lot of libraries, and I keep hearing from, I'm trying to get a book from the library, but they say I've got a 3-week wait or something. And I think, yes, brilliant. But my website is the key thing. Most things are through my website. I do.
And what is your website?
Yes, good question. It's www.birthingwisdom.com.au, although there's another one which is www.rheadempsey.com.au. So either way they could get there.
Thank you. Are you on social media?
I am on social media. So when I say that, I understand there is social media out there, and I occasionally get on it personally, but other people sort of play around with it a little bit for me. So
we can connect with your message there, though.
So on Facebook, I have two. I have a public page, which is sort of Rhea Dempsey Birthing Wisdom. I think that's what you call it, a public page. And then there's a personal one, which is Rhea Dempsey, which they're pretty much the same thing, it seems. Instagram, I think, is probably at Rhea Dempsey.
I love how you're so old school. Yeah. It's like warming my heart.
I am on Twitter, but who knows what that handle would be. I think there might even be something on YouTube. I don't know. I don't think it's a channel.
We've got all the links in the show notes. Please go there. So, Rhea, before we wrap up, is there any last sentence that you would like to leave the birthing women of the world, of whom is an international audience on this podcast with thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads per month? What would you like them to know?
Just the beauty and wonder and power of birthing, yeah. And that think, that birthing process, nothing is wasted. Yeah, it's a tough gig, but we get the benefit then of all the hormones. And we get the benefit then in terms of that being attuned with your baby right from that start, because the brain waves are changing and you're really in an attunement with your baby's slower brain waves. So, that's, if you yourself as a baby have been well cared for and have a solid attachment, but many of us don't. And so something about that foundation of the hormones, the shift in brain waves, the attunement to your baby at that deep, deep level of brainwave attunement, it's really the beginning of the instincts that then can be the foundation for the more conscious efforts that we need to make in terms of mothering for strong attachment and
it sets you up.
It sets you up. And it's a wild ride. It's
pretty great.
Just don't think about it in terms of pain. Just think it's a wild ride. And getting to know yourself and doing that work. And yeah.
Oh, beautiful, Rhea. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, soul, life's work, passion, time, and just being here with us. It's, we both feel so blessed and graced. So I'm sure our listeners do as well. It was one of the episodes when we released that we had locked in a date with you that went crazy in the question asking, which I know we haven't got to them all. So please connect with Rhea online. But, we are just all so grateful that there are matriarchs and women pioneering and caring for the birthing care of mothers today. So also really grateful. So thank you.
So beautiful to be here with you. Thanks so much.
You want to wrap us up, Bridgie?
Yes, so remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
And if you want to support Nourishing the Mother and all the late nights, the early mornings, the blood, sweat and tears we pour into our art, then please go to patreon.com/NTM podcast and become our patron. As a patron, you're helping all of the cost of operating this podcast, the hosting, the editing, the transcription, helping all of that be completely covered, and joining a community who are all about honouring our journeys and continuing to open. The more support we have, the longer we can last. So become a patron. We'd love to have you. Go to patreon.com/NTM podcast. We literally couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.